The air in the New York City family courtroom was stale, thick with the ghosts of 1,000 ended marriages. It was a sterile, impersonal space of polished wood and cold marble, designed to process human heartbreak with bureaucratic efficiency. From her wheelchair, Eleanor Vance observed it all with the detached calm of a seasoned analyst. She noted the wear on the judge's gavel, the faint water stain on a ceiling tile, the nervous tick of her husband's high-priced lawyer. Her mind, the one part of her that the crash hadn't broken, was always collecting data. Her own lawyer patted her hand reassuringly. "It's almost over, Eleanor." She gave a small, serene nod. Opposite her, her husband's soon-to-be ex-husband, Julian Croft, could not sit still. He radiated a restless, eager energy, a man waiting for the starting gun to begin a new race. He had built his father's modest electronics company into Croft Holdings, a successful tech firm, but his ambition had always outpaced his patience. He saw her, his wife of 10 years, as a relic of a past he was desperate to shed. The wheelchair was just a physical manifestation of the anchor he felt she had become. "The court grants the petition for dissolution of marriage," the judge intoned, his voice flat with routine. "The settlement agreement, as filed, is hereby ratified." It was done. Julian was free. He received the lion's share uncontested control of Croft Holdings, the sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue, the Hamptons estate. Eleanor received a generous but standard settlement, the kind of sum designed to ensure her silence and comfort for the rest of her days. He thought he was buying her off. He had no idea what she had already bought herself. As they exited the courthouse, a wall of flashing lights and shouted questions erupted before them. Paparazzi. Julian, far from being annoyed, seemed to have been expecting it. He straightened his tie, a confident, predatory smile spreading across his face. This was not a private sorrow, it was a public spectacle, and he was the star. A sleek black town car pulled up, and a woman emerged. Isabella Rossi. She was stunning. A vision in a white designer dress, her dark hair flowing, her smile radiant. Julian's mistress. She slid her hand into his, and they turned to face the media together. "Now that this difficult chapter of my life is officially closed," Julian announced to the cameras, his voice booming with theatrical sincerity, "I am thrilled to share some wonderful news. Miss Isabella Rossi has agreed to be my wife. We will be married this afternoon in a private ceremony." The announcement was a calculated act of public cruelty, a final twist of the knife designed to humiliate the disabled wife he had left behind. The reporters went into a frenzy. Eleanor, waiting quietly for her own accessible van to arrive, watched the scene with an unreadable expression. Her lawyer was muttering curses under his breath, but Eleanor seemed unfazed. Isabella, having posed for the cameras, detached herself from Julian's arm and glided toward Eleanor. It was a victory lap. Her movements were fluid, her face a perfect mask of sweet, condescending sympathy. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "I am so truly sorry for how all of this has played out. I do hope you can find some happiness in the future." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Julian and I are just so thrilled to finally be able to start our lives together. He deserves to be with someone who can keep up with him." The insult hung in the air, sharp and venomous. She expected tears, a bitter retort, a show of pain. But as Isabella leaned in, her expensive perfume filling the air, Eleanor saw it. It wasn't in the perfect face or the triumphant smile. It was in the details. The specific, almost imperceptible way Isabella shifted her weight. A subtle surveillance technique to check her surroundings. The fleeting, cold assessment in her eyes as she scanned the crowd. The way she used a term of sympathy as a weapon of psychological dominance. It was a signature, a methodology. And in that instant, the sterile courtroom, the flashing cameras, all of it faded away. Eleanor was no longer in New York. She was back in a dark, secure room in Langley, Virginia. Years ago, staring at a screen. She was Assistant U.S. Attorney Eleanor Vance, the lead prosecutor for a task force on international organized crime, and she was studying the tradecraft of the world's most dangerous corporate predators. She was studying the Odessa Network. The Odessa Network was not a gang. It was a plague. They were ghosts, specialists in corporate infiltration and asset stripping. They didn't use bombs or bullets. They used people. They would identify a target company, then insert an operative, a man or a woman, always beautiful, charming, and impossibly seductive, into the life of its CEO. The operative would become a lover, a confidant, and eventually a spouse. Once they had legal access, they would systematically gut the company from the inside, bleeding it dry, transferring its patents, its technology, and its wealth into their own untraceable shell corporations. Eleanor had been closer than anyone to bringing them down. She had been weeks away from securing an indictment against their leadership when a 2-ton truck had run a red light, crushing her car and her spine, ending her career and burying the case. The official report called it an accident. Eleanor knew it was an assassination attempt. And now, a living, breathing ghost from that war, an operative from the Odessa Network, was standing before her, dripping with fake sympathy and preparing to marry her ex-husband. Isabella Rossi wasn't just a gold digger. She was a soldier in an enemy army, and she had just delivered herself to the one person on earth who knew exactly what she was. A slow smile spread across Eleanor Vance's face. It was not a happy smile. It was not a sad smile. It was a small, quiet, and deeply unsettling expression. It was the calm, knowing smile of a grandmaster at a chessboard who has just watched her opponent, after a long and complicated game, confidently and obliviously walk his own king directly into an inescapable 16-move checkmate. It was the smile of a hunter who had been waiting patiently in the forest for years, and the wolf had just strolled into her perfectly laid trap. Isabella's triumphant expression faltered. She took a step back, unnerved by the sheer, unexpected confidence radiating from the woman in the wheelchair. She had expected a broken victim. She was faced with something else entirely, something she could not comprehend. Eleanor's van pulled up to the curb. Her driver, a large man with a discreet earpiece and the quiet competence of an ex-Special Forces operator, helped her into the vehicle. As the lift raised her into the van, Eleanor gave one last, calm look at the unsettled Isabella and the blissfully ignorant Julian. The doors closed, shutting out the media frenzy. The divorce was not an ending. The wedding was not a victory. They were merely the opening moves in a much older, much more dangerous game. And Eleanor Vance was finally ready to make her next move. Eleanor Vance's new home was a meticulously renovated brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. From the outside, it was elegant but unassuming. Inside, it was a fortress. The townhouse had been retrofitted with a state-of-the-art private elevator, reinforced windows, and a commercial-grade server room in the basement. This was not the quiet, sad residence of a spurned, disabled woman. This was the headquarters of a hunter. After her driver, a former Special Forces operator named Alex, whom she trusted implicitly, helped her inside. She bypassed the elegant living room and took the elevator directly to her office on the second floor. The room was lined with books on law, finance, and history. One entire wall was a bank of high-resolution monitors, currently dark. This was her true home, her command center. She wheeled herself to the window, looking out at the distant, glittering skyline of Manhattan. She thought of Julian and his beautiful new bride. The world saw a tragic divorce and a triumphant new union. But Eleanor saw the opening moves of a war that had gone cold for 5 years. A war she had thought was lost the day she lost the use of her legs. Her mind drifted back. 5 years earlier, Assistant U.S. Attorney Eleanor Vance, tall, confident, and relentless, stood before a task force of skeptical FBI and Treasury agents in a secure briefing room in Langley. On the large screen behind her was a complex diagram of shell corporations and offshore accounts. The Odessa network is not a traditional criminal enterprise, she explained, her voice sharp and clear. They don't deal in drugs or weapons. They deal in companies. They are corporate parasites. Their primary weapon is seduction, in every sense of the word. She laid out their methodology, a pattern she had painstakingly pieced together from the wreckage of a dozen bankrupted companies across the globe. They identify a target, a company with valuable, under-leveraged assets, often run by a CEO with a specific psychological vulnerability: pride, greed, or, most often, loneliness. Then they deploy an operative, she continued, clicking to the next slide, which showed the photos of several stunningly beautiful men and women. These are not common honey traps. These operatives are highly trained in finance, psychology, and corporate law. They are inserted into the target's life. They become the perfect partner, the soulmate. Once they have gained the target's complete trust, usually through marriage, they gain legal access to the company. Then begins the asset stripping. Patents, real estate, cash reserves, all siphoned off into the network's own labyrinth of shell companies. By the time the target realizes what's happened, their company is a hollowed-out husk, and the operative has vanished. The agents in the room were skeptical. It sounded like something out of a spy novel. But Eleanor had the data, the financial trails, the broken lives left in their wake. She was getting close. She could feel it. She was building a case that could finally put a name and a face to the network's shadowy leadership. 1 week later, rain slicked the pavement of the West Side Highway. Eleanor was driving home, her mind still working through the complex financial data. She was thinking about the final piece of evidence she needed. The light ahead turned green. She proceeded through the intersection. She never saw the 10-ton semi-truck that ran the red light from a side street. It didn't swerve. It didn't brake. It simply accelerated. Its target the driver's side door of her sedan. The impact was a cataclysm of shattering glass and shearing metal. Then, darkness. They called it an accident, a drunk driver who had died in the crash. But Eleanor, when she woke up in the hospital to the horrifying new reality of a body that would no longer obey her, knew better. The hit was too professional, too perfect. The Odessa network had silenced her. Her recovery was a long, brutal war fought on 2 fronts. The first was the physical battle, the grueling hours of therapy, the frustration of learning to navigate the world from a seated position. The second was the silent, secret war she refused to abandon. She had lost her career. She had lost her mobility. And over the next few years, she lost her husband. Julian had been supportive at first, but he was a man who worshipped strength and forward momentum. He grew weary of the slow, painstaking process of her recovery. He began to see her wheelchair not as a tool, but as a symbol of weakness, of a life stalled. He grew distant, impatient. He started working later. Then he started his affair with Isabella Rossi. Eleanor had watched it all, her heart aching, but her analytical mind never stopped working. She used her settlement from the city, combined with her own considerable savings, to build her new life, her fortress. She reconnected with a few trusted allies from her past, a retired FBI forensic accountant named George, and a young, brilliant white hat hacker she had once mentored named Anya. From her wheelchair, in her quiet office, she continued her hunt. They monitored the financial world, looking for the signature of an Odessa network attack. For years, there was nothing. They had gone deep underground after the attempt on her life. Eleanor wondered if she was just chasing ghosts, a bitter woman obsessed with a past she couldn't change. And then, 18 months ago, she saw a picture of Julian in a gossip column. He was at a charity gala, and on his arm was Isabella Rossi. Eleanor had her team do a background check. On the surface, Isabella was perfect. The daughter of a minor Italian aristocrat, educated in Switzerland, with a modest trust fund and a vaguely defined career as an art consultant. But to Eleanor, the profile was a series of red flags. The school in Switzerland was known as a finishing school for the children of the global elite, and a rumored recruiting ground for intelligence agencies. The family's minor title was a front for a network of questionable investments. Eleanor knew the pattern. It was like reading the first chapter of a book she had read a dozen times. The target, Julian Croft, CEO of a company with valuable patents in a growing tech sector. A man she knew was emotionally vulnerable and hungry for a life of greater glamour. The operative, Isabella Rossi, a beautiful, sophisticated woman with a flawless but unverifiable background, who suddenly appears in his life. Eleanor had watched from the shadows as the relationship progressed exactly according to the Odessa Network's playbook. The whirlwind romance, the engagement, and finally, Julian's demand for a divorce. He was so blinded by Isabella's charm and the promise of a new, exciting life. He had no idea he was a lamb being led to the slaughter, and Eleanor had let it happen. It was the hardest, most painful decision of her life. But she knew that to warn Julian would be to show her hand. The network would simply pull Isabella out, erase their tracks, and disappear again for years. Her only chance to destroy them was to let them believe they were winning, to let them walk into the trap. Now, sitting in her office after the day's traumatic events, Eleanor looked at the large monitor on her wall. On the left side was a smiling, beautiful photo of Isabella Rossi from a fashion magazine. On the right was a complex diagram of the Odessa Network's known associates and shell corporations. With a few keystrokes, she drew a single, bold red line, connecting the beautiful face of the bride to the dark heart of the criminal enterprise. Her old enemy had finally resurfaced, and in the most personal way imaginable. Her smile in front of the courthouse had not been one of bitterness or defeat. It was the pure, cold, and deeply satisfying smile of a master hunter who, after years of patient waiting in the wilderness, had just seen her quarry emerge from the trees and step directly into her sights. The hunt was on again. While the city's gossip columns buzzed with the scandalous tale of the billionaire, his new bride, and his tragic ex-wife, Eleanor Vance was meticulously setting a chessboard. The world saw a woman defeated, cast aside. What they didn't see was the master strategist patiently arranging her pieces for a game that had started months before the divorce was ever finalized. The flashback began 6 months prior, the day Eleanor's private investigation confirmed that Isabella Rossi was not just a beautiful socialite, but a woman with deep, untraceable ties to the same financial circles as the Odessa Network. It was the confirmation of her worst fears and the ignition of a long-dormant fire. Her first calls were to the only 2 people on Earth she trusted with her life. George, the retired FBI forensic accountant, answered on the first ring. He was a 70-year-old widower with a mind like a steel trap and an unwavering loyalty to Eleanor, whom he still saw as the best prosecutor he had ever worked with. "I was wondering when you'd call. Elle," he'd said. "I saw the pictures of your husband with that Rossi woman. Smelled wrong from a mile away." Her second call was to Anya, a prodigy in her early 20s whom Eleanor had discovered hacking into a Swiss bank's servers at the age of 16. Instead of turning her in, Eleanor had mentored her, funneling her chaotic brilliance into a disciplined skill set. Anya was now one of the most formidable white-hat hackers in the world, a digital phantom loyal only to Eleanor. They met in the secure library of her Brooklyn brownstone. Eleanor, her face calm and resolute, laid out the situation. "The Odessa Network is back," she stated simply. "They are targeting Croft Holdings, and they are using my husband as their point of entry." "We go to the feds," George said immediately. "We give them what we have." "No," Eleanor countered, her voice firm. "We tried that 5 years ago. The network has informants everywhere. The case was buried, and I ended up in this chair. This time, we don't hand the authorities a weapon. We hand them a finished case, with the criminals gift-wrapped. We can't just prove they're trying to take over the company. We have to let them get their hands dirty. We have to let them think they've won." Her plan was audacious, complex, and deeply personal. The objective was not to save her marriage, she knew that was already lost, but to use the impending divorce as the ultimate Trojan horse. She would let Julian and his new love have the company. But the company they received would be a hollowed-out shell, a gilded trap rigged to explode. The silent war began. While Julian was wining and dining, Isabella, believing his wife was at home, depressed and resigned. Eleanor was orchestrating a massive, clandestine restructuring of Croft Holdings. George, working with a discreet team of international trust lawyers, began the legal maneuvering. It was a masterpiece of corporate misdirection. The company's most valuable assets were its intellectual property, a portfolio of groundbreaking AI and machine learning patents that were the true engine of its success. One by one, George's team drafted complex licensing agreements and transferred the ownership of these core patents from Croft Holdings to a newly created anonymous trust based in Liechtenstein, a trust secretly controlled by Eleanor. The public-facing company, Croft Holdings, retained the usage rights to the patents, so its value on paper remained immense. But its soul, its actual intrinsic worth, had been surgically removed and placed in an untouchable vault. Meanwhile, Anya, from her own secure location, began the digital restructuring. She created a perfect phantom copy of the entire patent database, a digital honeypot. This flawless replica would remain on the Croft Holdings servers, looking exactly like the real thing. It was designed to be found, to be stolen, but every file within it was embedded with a sophisticated, dormant tracking algorithm. The moment those files were moved or accessed from an unauthorized network, they would signal their location back to Anya, and a silent, irreversible corruption sequence would begin. The real data, the true patents, were moved to a new, air-gapped server in a secure facility in Switzerland, a server that didn't technically exist on any network map. Anya also wove a web of digital tripwires and time bombs throughout the Croft Holdings financial systems, all tied to specific high-value accounts. Any attempt to transfer sums over a certain threshold or to liquidate certain assets would trigger an automatic system-wide lockdown and an anonymous alert to international financial crime regulators. All the while, Eleanor played her part with heartbreaking perfection. To Julian, she was the withdrawn, increasingly depressive wife. She put up a token fight during the divorce proceedings, a performance for the benefit of Julian's lawyers. She argued over the Hamptons estate. She negotiated the alimony. But when it came to the company, she relented with a sigh of weary resignation. "Take it, Julian," she had told him, her voice a perfect imitation of defeat. "It was always your world anyway. I just want this to be over." He and his lawyers had seen it as a victory, the final capitulation of a broken woman. They had no idea she was joyfully handing them the keys to an empty castle, a castle she had already looted and rigged to burn. The chapter ended back in the present, 2 days after the wedding. Eleanor sat in her command center, the array of monitors before her glowing in the dark room. One screen showed the society pages, filled with glossy photos of the happy new couple, Julian Croft and Isabella Rossi Croft, embarking on their honeymoon. They looked triumphant, the picture of a modern power couple. Another screen showed a complex color-coded diagram. It displayed the hollow shell of Croft Holdings, and next to it, the secure, untouchable trust where the company's true value now resided. A third screen showed a map, tracking the phantom pings from the honeypot data, waiting for the thieves to make their move. The board was set. The trap was laid. The bait was taken. Eleanor looked at the smiling face of her ex-husband's new bride and allowed herself a small, cold smile of her own, the one she had worn at the courthouse. It was the quiet, deeply satisfying smile of a patient predator who knows the hunt is almost over. All she had to do now was wait for the screaming to start. The honeymoon was a brief, sun-drenched charade in St. Bart's. Julian Croft, still captivated by his dazzling new wife, saw it as the perfect start to their new life. For Isabella, it was a tedious but necessary delay. The moment their private jet touched down in New York, her real work began. "Darling," she said to Julian one evening in their magnificent Park Avenue penthouse, her voice a silken purr as she adjusted the knot on his tie. "You've built such an incredible company, but to compete on a global scale, it needs to be optimized, modernized. My family has some experience in this. Let me help you. Let me bring in a team, the best in Europe, just to assess the assets and suggest a path forward. Think of it as my wedding gift to you." Julian, blinded by her beauty and eager to impress her with his business acumen, readily agreed. He was a competent CEO, but he had always felt a slight insecurity about running in the truly global leagues of men like Isabella's father. Her involvement felt like a validation, a step up into the world he craved. He granted her and her consultants full, unrestricted access to Croft Holdings. Isabella's team descended on the company headquarters the following week. They were not scruffy hackers. They were a trio of immaculately dressed, multilingual Europeans who introduced themselves as partners from a prestigious Zurich consulting firm. They exuded an aura of quiet, intimidating competence. They were, in fact, the Odessa Network's top specialists in corporate decapitation, their mission to locate the valuable AI patent portfolio, transfer ownership to an offshore entity, and then systematically liquidate the rest of Croft Holdings' assets, leaving Julian with a bankrupt shell. They set up in a glass-walled conference room, and their lead tech analyst began the digital search. Within hours, he found what he was looking for, a secure server partition labeled R&D Patents, Master. It was the honeypot Anya had so carefully constructed. "It's almost too easy," the tech analyst reported to Isabella, a smug smile on his face. "The security is decent, but amateurish. I'm initiating a test transfer of a single patent file to our server in Cyprus now." In her Brooklyn command center, Eleanor watched the alert flash across her screen. Anya sat at an adjacent terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Tripwire activated," Anya reported, her voice calm. "They're in the honeypot. They're attempting to download the file for Project Chimera. I have a lock on their destination server IP, and the tracker embedded in the file is active." Eleanor felt a grim satisfaction. "Let them take it," she said. "Let the mouse have the cheese." In the Croft Holdings conference room, the transfer completed. The Odessa team celebrated with a quiet cheer. Then they tried to open the file. It was corrupted. A string of meaningless code. "A glitch," the tech analyst muttered. Annoyed, "The transfer must have been interrupted. I'll try another one." He tried again with a different file. The result was the same. Corrupted. Unreadable. He tried a third time. And this time, the server in Cyprus alerted him that a malicious code had been detected and the entire server had to be quarantined and scrubbed. The cheese had been poisoned. Isabella's confidence began to fray. "What is going on?" she demanded, her voice losing its silken edge. "I don't understand," the analyst stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's like the data is destroying itself upon transfer. And I can't seem to get to the server's core directory. There's a layer of encryption here that... It's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's not a wall, it's a maze. Every time I think I find a way in, the path just rewrites itself." Frustrated by the digital roadblock, Isabella pivoted to the legal front. If they couldn't steal the data, they would steal the ownership. She instructed her legal expert to begin drafting the documents to transfer the ownership of the entire patent portfolio to their shell corporation. This was when they hit the second wall, George's impenetrable legal fortress. The legal expert returned to Isabella an hour later, his face pale. "We have a problem," he said. "A significant problem. The patents are no longer legally owned by Croft Holdings." "What are you talking about?" Isabella snapped. "Sometime in the last 6 months, ownership of all key intellectual property was transferred to a blind trust in Liechtenstein. The trust's charter is a work of art. It's a legal labyrinth. The conditions for another transfer of ownership are, well, they're practically impossible to meet without the consent of the original benefactor, whose identity is sealed." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. A sophisticated digital trap that destroyed the data it was meant to protect. A complex legal fortress built months before she had even made her final move on Julian. This wasn't bad luck. This was a deliberate, brilliantly executed defense. Someone had known they were coming. Someone had prepared for them. Her mind flashed back to the courthouse, to the quiet woman in the wheelchair, to the strange, knowing and deeply unsettling smile on her face. That night, Isabella received a call on her own encrypted phone. It was her handler from the Odessa network. His voice was cold and without pleasantries. "Report," he commanded. "We've encountered unforeseen complexities," Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The assets are more heavily protected than our initial intelligence suggested." "Complexities is not a word our employers appreciate." "Isabella," the voice replied, a clear thread of menace in its tone. "They appreciate results. You were sent to acquire the assets of a second-rate tech company run by an emotional, easily manipulated man. It was supposed to be a simple operation. You assured us it was." "Something is wrong," Isabella insisted. "Someone else is in this game. Someone who knew we were coming." "Then you will find out who it is," the handler said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "And you will eliminate the complication. The timeline has not changed. Our employers are not patient. Do not fail." The line went dead. Isabella stood staring out the window of the Park Avenue penthouse she had won so easily. The glittering city spread out before her, a kingdom at her feet. But she felt no triumph. She felt trapped. The prize she had been sent to capture was an empty box, and the chilling possibility began to dawn on her that she, the master con artist, the brilliant operative, had in fact been the one who had been conned all along. The bitter honeymoon had just begun. Isabella Rossicroft was accustomed to control. Her life had been a carefully orchestrated performance where she was the director, the writer, and the star. But now, for the first time, she felt like an actress in a play she didn't understand, reading from a script written by a hostile, invisible author. Her team of consultants had been at Croft Holdings for 3 weeks and had accomplished nothing. Every digital pathway they attempted to exploit led to a dead end. Every legal maneuver they tried was blocked by a labyrinthine fortress of trusts and counterclauses. The multi-million-dollar prize they had come for remained tantalizingly out of reach. Her paranoia began to fester. She started digging into Eleanor Vance's past, using the Odessa network's resources to pull old files. The official story was all there, a brilliant, rising star in the U.S. Attorney's Office, her career tragically cut short by a drunk driving accident. A sad story, a pathetic story. It didn't fit. The woman responsible for the sophisticated, multi-layered defense of Croft Holdings could not possibly be the broken, defeated creature described in those files. The dissonance was maddening. Meanwhile, her new husband was becoming a problem. Julian, no longer blinded by the initial bliss of their whirlwind romance, was starting to ask questions. "Your consultants have been here for weeks." "Isabella," he said one evening, a note of frustration in his voice. "But I haven't seen a single report. What exactly are they assessing?" "These things take time, darling." She'd purred, using her charm to deflect him, but she could see a new, unwelcome suspicion in his eyes. The perfect, adoring husband was beginning to think for himself. While Isabella's world was contracting into a vortex of frustration and fear, Eleanor's was expanding. The time for passive defense was over. It was time to awaken the ghosts. From her command center, she initiated a secure video call. The face that appeared on her screen was weathered and intelligent, a man in his late 50s with the weary eyes of a lifelong lawman. This was Deputy Director Markham of Interpol, her former partner on the Odessa task force. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a mixture of shock and warmth. "It's been too long. I was sorry to hear about your divorce." "The divorce was a business transaction." "Mark," she replied, her voice crisp. "I'm calling because I have a new lead on an old case. The Odessa network. They're active again." Markham leaned forward, his expression instantly serious. "Are you sure?" "Positive," Eleanor said. "They've gotten sloppy. They tried to acquire a data file from a server based in Cyprus 2 weeks ago. The transfer failed, but it left a digital footprint. I'm sending you the IP address of the destination server now. It will lead you to a shell company registered in Malta. It's a loose thread. I thought you might want to pull on it. She was giving him just enough to launch his own investigation, without revealing her personal connection to the current case. She was planting a seed in the global law enforcement community. A seed that she knew would grow into a tree of trouble for her enemies. While Markham's official investigation began its slow, methodical grind, Eleanor and Anya launched their own campaign of chaos. They would not attack Croft Holdings or any entity directly linked to Julian. Instead, they targeted the broader financial ecosystem of the Odessa network. Anya, working as Spectre, began to feed information to a network of financial bloggers and journalists across Europe. In Germany, an anonymous tip complete with bank routing numbers led to a story about a Frankfurt-based private bank being used for Russian money laundering. In Spain, leaked documents revealed a massive real estate deal in Madrid was a fraudulent enterprise designed to cheat foreign investors. In Italy, a story broke about a luxury goods exporter being a front for the syndicate. To the world, these appeared to be separate, unrelated corporate scandals. But within the Odessa network, it was a catastrophe. Their operations, once shrouded in secrecy, were suddenly being exposed to the light, one by one. The pressure on Isabella became immense. The calls from her handler were no longer just cold, they were openly threatening. Frankfurt has been compromised. His disembodied voice hissed over her secure line. The Madrid operation is collapsing. The banks are freezing our accounts. All of this started when you arrived in New York. Isabella, the entire network is catching fire, and you are standing at the source of the blaze. You will fix this. You will acquire the Croft assets as planned, or you will be held personally responsible for this failure. And you know what that means. She knew. Failure in the Odessa network was not met with a severance package. It was met with a permanent, silent retirement. She was trapped. She couldn't acquire the assets. She couldn't explain the sophisticated defenses she was facing, and she couldn't escape the growing, terrifying suspicion that the source of all her problems was the smiling, silent woman in the wheelchair. She began to watch old news footage of Eleanor Vance, the prosecutor. She saw a brilliant, relentless woman, a giant of the legal world. Then she looked at the photos of Eleanor after the accident, looking frail, broken. The two images didn't reconcile. It was as if she were two different people. Her breaking point came one evening when Julian confronted her. "I did some checking on that consulting firm you hired," he said, his voice cold. "The one from Zurich. It doesn't exist. The address is a mail drop. Who are these people?" "Isabella. And what are they really doing in my company?" The facade crumbled. She was being attacked from the outside by an invisible enemy. Her superiors were threatening her, and now her new husband, her Mark, was looking at her with open suspicion. She retreated to her room, her mind racing. She was a master of the con, the predator. But now, she felt like the prey. She felt like she was being hunted. She felt as though the ghosts of her organization's past victims were rising from their graves, all at once, to exact their revenge. And leading them, she now knew with a chilling, gut-wrenching certainty, was the ghost who wasn't a ghost at all. The smiling, broken woman whose life she had helped ruin, Eleanor Vance. The pressure from her superiors in the Odessa network had become a physical, crushing weight on Isabella. The threats were no longer veiled. She had been given a final, 72-hour deadline to acquire the Croft assets, or face the consequences. Desperation forced her hand. Her tech team, after weeks of humiliating failure, reported a single potential vulnerability. It was not in the intellectual property, but in a large secondary investment subsidiary of Croft Holdings called the Croft Legacy Fund. It held tens of millions in liquid assets and seemed to be protected by older, less complex security protocols. It was a tempting target. In reality, the entire fund was a ghost. A sophisticated digital fabrication created by Eleanor's team, a pot of honey designed to attract a hungry and desperate bear. Isabella, seeing no other option, decided to risk everything on one last audacious smash and grab. Her plan was to liquidate the entire fund in a single massive wire transfer to an untraceable account. Julian however, was no longer her willing, oblivious puppet. An honest, long-serving accountant in his company, alarmed by the unprecedented size and nature of the requested transfer, had secretly alerted him. Julian confronted Isabella in the penthouse, his voice finally shedding its last vestiges of infatuation, replaced by the cold authority of a CEO. "The transfer is not approved. Isabella," he stated flatly, "you are not to touch the legacy fund. I am locking down all major financial transactions pending a full review of your consultant's activities." The confrontation was brief and ugly. Isabella tried to use her charm, then her anger. But Julian stood firm. The line had been drawn. Realizing she could no longer manipulate him, Isabella feigned contrition, agreeing to halt the transfer. But as soon as Julian left for his office, she initiated her real plan. Using forged digital credentials created by her team to mimic Julian's authority, she bypassed his lockdown and initiated the transfer herself. It was a reckless, criminal act, born of pure desperation. In her Brooklyn command center, Eleanor watched it all unfold on her screens. Anya sat at the main terminal, her fingers a blur on the keyboard. "She's making her move." "Eleanor," Anya reported, her voice calm. "She's using a forged CEO authorization to initiate a full liquidation of the Honeypot Fund. The transfer has started." "Is Markham's team ready?" Eleanor asked, her eyes fixed on the flow of data. "Interpol and the DOJ are on standby," Anya confirmed. "The automated alert is tied to the final stage of the transfer. The moment the funds hit the destination account, the trap springs." "Let her run," Eleanor said, her voice as cold as ice. "Let her think she's home free." In her temporary office at Croft Holdings, Isabella watched the progress bar on her screen with a frantic, triumphant hope. The initial security layers were bypassed. The transfer was moving. Millions of dollars were flowing through the digital ether, heading toward an account that would be untraceable by the time anyone discovered it was gone. For a moment, she felt a surge of her old power. She had done it. She had beaten the system. She had beaten the ghost of Eleanor Vance. The progress bar hit 99%. Transaction complete. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made her dizzy washed over her. She picked up her phone to report her success to her handler. And then all hell broke loose. The moment the transaction was confirmed, Eleanor's digital time bomb detonated. It was not a destructive bomb, but a weapon of pure information. Simultaneously, across the globe, a series of events were triggered. In a secure office at Interpol headquarters in Lyon, Deputy Director Markham's computer pinged with a high-priority alert. It was an automated data dump from a source he now knew as Vance. It contained the complete, irrefutable proof of the fraudulent transfer in progress, linked directly to Isabella Rossi and a known Odessa network bank account. It was accompanied by the full, unredacted case file Eleanor had been building for years. Markham picked up his phone. "It's a go," he said. "Execute warrants on all targets. Now." In New York, the transaction, instead of settling, was frozen midstream by a federal emergency order. Not only was the destination account locked, but every account linked to it in the Odessa network's complex web was instantly frozen. Their global financial network was paralyzed in a single stroke. In Isabella's office, her screen, which had a moment ago shown a message of success, suddenly went red. Transaction failed. Account frozen by international law enforcement order. She stared at the words, her mind unable to process them. It was impossible. How? Before she could even react, the sound of shouting erupted in the hallway outside her office. She heard the heavy running footsteps of men. The glass doors to her office burst open, and a dozen FBI agents in full tactical gear swarmed in, their weapons raised. Isabella Rossi, the lead agent, shouted, "You are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering hands where I can see them now." She stood there, frozen, her phone slipping from her numb fingers and clattering to the floor. Her world of cons, seduction, and manipulation had come to a final, brutal, and spectacular end. The hunter had been caught in a trap she had never even seen. Simultaneously, Coordinated raids were being carried out in London, Zurich, and Monaco, as law enforcement agencies, armed with the sudden flood of perfect evidence from Eleanor's data dump, moved in on the other key nodes of the Odessa network. In his own office down the hall, Julian received a frantic call from his head of security. "Sir, the FBI is here. They're raiding the consultant's offices. They've arrested Isabella." Julian sank into his chair, a profound sense of shock and a strange, quiet awe washing over him. He finally understood. The entire affair, his wife's infidelity, the divorce, the new marriage, it had all been a battlefield. And his ex-wife, the quiet, disabled woman he had pitied and discarded, had been the commanding general all along. She hadn't just been protecting the company. She had been using it as bait. In her quiet command center, Eleanor Vance watched it all on a multi-panel screen displaying news feeds from around the world. Live footage of the raid on Croft Holdings. A headline from London about the arrest of a prominent banker. A report from Zurich about another. George, the old FBI accountant, stood behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You got them. Elle," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "After all these years, you got them all." Eleanor looked at the face of Isabella Rossi being led away in handcuffs. There was no triumph in her expression, no joy. There was only the quiet, profound satisfaction of a long and difficult job finally, completely done. The trap, which she had started building the day she woke up in a hospital bed 5 years ago, had finally sprung. The fall of the Odessa network was not a single event. It was a global demolition. The evidence contained on the data drive, unlocked by Eleanor's trap, was so comprehensive and damning that law enforcement agencies in a dozen countries were able to act in concert. In the weeks that followed, the full scale of their criminal empire was laid bare to a shocked public. The shell corporations, the political bribery, the ruined companies, the lives destroyed by their silent, predatory warfare. Isabella Rossi, facing a life sentence in a federal prison, chose to cooperate, her testimony becoming the final nail in the coffin of the organization she had so proudly served. For Julian Croft, the aftermath was a private hell of public humiliation. His name was inextricably linked to the scandal. His company, Croft Holdings, was saved from total collapse only by the legal firewalls Eleanor had secretly constructed. But its reputation was in tatters. He was a laughingstock in the financial world. The brilliant CEO who had been so thoroughly and completely duped, a willing pawn in his own destruction. He lost his seat on 2 major corporate boards and was forced to step down as CEO of his own company. He had traded his wife for a kingdom, only to find the kingdom was a house of cards and his new queen was a venomous snake. A month after the arrests, he requested a meeting with Eleanor. He arrived at her Brooklyn brownstone, a humbled, broken man. When the door opened, he saw her for the first time not as a patient or a victim, but as she truly was. He saw the elevator, the security features, and finally, the command center on the 2nd floor, with its bank of powerful computers and data-covered screens. He was not entering the home of his ex-wife. He was entering the headquarters of the woman who had orchestrated the takedown of a global criminal syndicate from a wheelchair. "Eleanor," he began, his voice barely a whisper. I came to say I'm sorry." She looked at him from across the room, her expression calm and unreadable. She simply waited for him to continue. "I was a fool," he said. The confession, a painful, necessary act of self-immolation. I was a blind, arrogant fool. I was so obsessed with building something bigger, with being more than my father was, that I couldn't see what I already had. I saw your strength as a weakness. I saw your intelligence as a challenge. And when you were hurt, I saw you as a burden." He took a shaky breath. "I thought you were a liability I had to manage, but you were the only real asset I ever had. And I threw you away for a cheap imitation. I am so sorry." Eleanor listened, her face betraying no emotion. When he was finished, she wheeled herself closer. "I accept your apology, Julian," she said. her voice devoid of anger or pity. It was simply a statement of fact. But you need to understand something. I didn't do this to save you, or your company. I did this for me. I did this for Ben Evans, and for Daniel Ramirez, and for every other person whose life was destroyed by them. Your involvement was a coincidence of my own history. She printed a single document from her computer and handed it to him. This is a strategic plan for the restructuring of Croft Holdings. It outlines a way to salvage the core assets and rebuild under a new charter of corporate transparency. It will be difficult, but it is viable. Consider it the final clause of our divorce settlement. It was an act of professional courtesy, a final, clean severance. He had come seeking forgiveness, and she had given him a business plan. The message was clear. Their personal history was over. After he left, Eleanor was alone in her quiet command center. She had won. Her enemies of 5 years were in chains. Their network was in ruins. Justice had been served. She wheeled herself to the large window and looked out at the city. She should have felt triumphant. But instead, she felt a quiet, profound ache. She looked down at her legs, still and unresponsive in the chair. Her victory, as immense as it was, could not change that. It could not undo the screech of tires, the crush of metal. It could not give her back the life they had stolen. Justice was not a cure. It was just an answer. A few weeks later, George and Anya came to the brownstone to celebrate. They opened a bottle of vintage champagne, and for the first time in years, the war room felt less like a command center and more like a living room. "So what's next?" Boss Anya asked, raising her glass. "A quiet retirement, a trip around the world." Eleanor smiled. A real, warm smile this time. "I don't think retirement is in my nature," she said. "The Odessa network isn't the only monster in the world, and a lot of people don't have the resources to fight back." She revealed her plan. She was using the considerable assets awarded to her by the courts as a primary victim of the Odessa conspiracy to create a new, private foundation, the Vance Initiative. It would not be a charity. It would be a non-profit strategic action group, a private intelligence agency for the public good. Its mission would be to take on the cases the FBI and Interpol were too slow or too politically constrained to handle to defend small companies, journalists, and activists from the predatory attacks of powerful, corrupt corporations and criminal syndicates. "The world needs more hunters," she said simply. The final scene took place 6 months later. Eleanor Vance sat before the glowing monitors in her command center. The room was the same, but she was different. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest. The ache was still there, a quiet companion, but it was no longer the driving force of her life. On the main screen was a new case file. A small, clean energy startup in Africa was being targeted by a massive, polluting multinational corporation that was trying to steal its solar panel technology. A new group of Davids against a new Goliath. Anya's voice came over the intercom. "We've analyzed their network. Eleanor, we found a vulnerability, a path in..." Eleanor looked at the data, her mind already seeing the patterns, the weaknesses, the strategy for a counterattack. She wheeled her chair closer to the screens, her fingers flying across her specialized keyboard. The smile on her face was no longer mysterious or unsettling. It was the calm, focused, and deeply purposeful smile of a woman who had found her true calling. She had lost the use of her legs, but from the quiet command of her wheelchair, she had learned how to move the world.